I heard the dogs growling before I even stepped outside. That low, rumbling kind of growl that told me something or someone was exactly where they shouldn't be. I walked out onto my back porch with a cup of coffee, just in time to see Ellen Everhart, president of the Lakewood Pines HOA, standing in my backyard like she owned the place. She had a pair of bolt cutters in one hand and a chunk of my cedar fence lying in the grass behind her. She hadn't seen me yet. She was too busy admiring the lake view. Now, let me back up just a second. My name's Trevor Langston. I'm a Marine vet, now working remote IT support, and I bought this house 2 years ago for one reason: the lake. It's private property, clearly marked, and I even reinforced the shoreline with a fence after some folks from the HOA started poking around trying to assess it. That's HOA speak for "we want a piece of it." Ellen had always eyed my lake access like it was some community resource she just hadn't claimed yet. At every HOA meeting, she brought it up. "Trevor, wouldn't it be lovely if the neighborhood could enjoy the lake too?" I always gave her the same answer. "No, Ellen, it's on my deed. It's mine." Apparently, she decided today was the day to take matters into her own perfectly manicured hands. I leaned against the porch railing and called out, "You lose something, Ellen?" She jumped like she'd been caught stealing cookies, then spun around with that fake, tight smile she wore like perfume. "Oh, Trevor, I didn't see you there. I was just inspecting the property line. With bolt cutters." I raised an eyebrow. She had the nerve to laugh. "Well, the HOA board voted to allow access to the lake for all residents. Your fence was obstructing that." I set my coffee down on the porch rail and whistled once short and sharp. From behind the shed, my 2 German shepherds, Brutus and Shadow, came trotting out like furry missiles. Their hackles were up, ears forward, but they didn't bark. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was enough to make Ellen freeze. "Trevor, what are you doing?" she snapped, suddenly not so confident. "You can't sick dogs on HOA officials. They're not sicked on anyone. They're just patrolling my private property." "You know, the one you just trespassed on and vandalized?" Brutus walked right up to her, sniffed her hand, then let out a low growl. Ellen stepped back so fast she nearly tripped over the broken fence post. "I'm going to report this," she said, her voice shaking now. "Oh, please do. I've got cameras and a copy of the property deed, and the laws on criminal trespassing printed out in a neat little folder inside." Her eyes flicked to the porch, then back to the dogs. "You've made a big mistake, Trevor." "No, Ellen, you did." I reached for my phone and started dialing. "Let's see what the sheriff thinks about your inspection." She turned and bolted through the broken fence before the call even connected. Brutus watched her go, then sat down like a soldier standing guard. I looked over at Shadow and muttered, "Well, buddy, looks like the HOA war just went hot." And I had every intention of finishing it. Deputy Raines arrived 20 minutes later, gravel crunching under tires as he pulled up in his cruiser. He took his sweet time getting out, adjusting his belt like he hated every inch of fabric touching him. We'd met once before, briefly, during a fireworks complaint last 4th of July. He remembered me. "Morning, Trevor," he said, eyeing the shredded fence. "Looks like you had a visitor." "Sure did," I replied, motioning toward the fresh cut in the fence line. Ellen Everhart came through with bolt cutters and a sense of entitlement. He crouched down, inspecting the damage. "You got her on video, 3 angles, high def. Audio's clean, too." He nodded slowly. "You planning to press charges?" I handed him a folder. "Here's a printed copy of the property boundary survey, the deed, and municipal code on criminal trespass and destruction of private fencing. I already emailed it to your office, too." Along with the footage. He flipped through it, eyebrows raising when he hit the highlighted sections. "You did your homework. She's not going to stop unless someone makes it official." He stood, stretching his back. "Well, this is no homeowner dispute. This is straight-up felony vandalism. And if she used HOA authority to justify it, we're looking at abuse of position and possible civil conspiracy, depending how deep it goes." That last part got my attention. Civil conspiracy? If she colluded with others on the board or pushed a vote through under false pretenses, then yeah. That's not just HOA overreach, that's criminal coordination. Before he left, he asked for a copy of my camera system's data file. I handed him a thumb drive. You'll probably get a visit from her attorney, he warned, sliding the drive into an evidence bag. They usually try to bluff before court. Don't engage, let your lawyer do the talking. I've got one lined up already, I said. Retired JAG officer owes me a favor. He gave a low whistle. You don't play around. Neither does Ellen. She's been sniffing around that lake for months. This was just the first time she got bold enough to act. He tipped his hat. I'll file the report today. You'll get a call once the DA reviews it. After he left, I walked the property line, documenting everything again with my phone. I measured the cut section, bagged the bolt cutter marks, and even found a scrap of torn fabric caught on a nail. Blue polyester, same shade as the blazer she wore. By noon, I'd replaced the broken section with thick gauge chain link and a no-nonsense sign. Private property trespassers will be prosecuted. I mounted a new camera facing the alley, this one with license plate recognition. The neighborhood grapevine kicked into overdrive by evening. I heard from my across-the-street neighbor, Phil, while we were both bringing in trash bins. Hey, Trevor, he called, glancing toward the lake behind my house. Heard Ellen tried to liberate the shoreline. Word travels fast. My wife was walking the dog when she saw her run out of your yard like her hair was on fire. Looked like she'd seen a ghost, I chuckled. More like two very large shepherds. He lowered his voice. You know, you're not the only one she's tried to push around. Last year, she fined the Harrisons for parking their boat trailer in their own driveway, said it violated community optics. Was it in the bylaws? Nope, she made it up. They appealed, but she blocked it from going to the full board. Said she was streamlining enforcement. That phrase stuck with me. The next morning, I filed an injunction with the county clerk's office to prevent any unauthorized access or modifications to my property by the HOA. It wasn't flashy, but it was legally binding. My lawyer, Colonel David Rourke, joined me on a video call that evening. She's not just overstepping, he said, flipping through the HOA charter I'd scanned over. She's rewriting rules without due process, that clause on unanimous board amendments. She's bypassing it. That makes every policy she's enforced in the last year potentially invalid. I leaned back in my chair. So what happens if the board didn't authorize her actions? Then she acted under color of authority. That's unlawful, and we open her up to personal liability. I had an idea. What if I could prove she's been using HOA funds without transparency? That would be major. Embezzlement, fraud, or misappropriation. You'd need financial records. I know someone who might help with that. I thought of Karen Wu, the treasurer who'd stepped down suddenly last quarter. She'd always seemed uncomfortable at meetings, especially when Ellen spoke over her. I found Karen's contact in an old email thread and left her a voicemail asking if we could talk off the record. She called back that night. Trevor, I've been waiting for someone to push back, she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I couldn't take it anymore. Ellen was using HOA funds for projects that were never approved, landscaping contracts with fake companies, security patrols that never showed up. She even tried to get reimbursed for a property development feasibility study that no one ever saw. You have proof? I copied everything to a private drive before I resigned, in case something like this happened. My pulse ticked up. Would you testify if it went to court? There was a pause. Then, yes, but only if I'm subpoenaed. I can't risk retaliation otherwise. I can make that happen. The next day, Colonel Rourke filed a formal request for HOA financial records under the state's nonprofit corporation laws. They were required to respond within 15 business days. If they didn't, we had grounds for a court order. I didn't have to wait that long. 2 days later, I came home to find a plain white envelope taped to my door. Inside was a cease and desist letter from the HOA's law firm, accusing me of creating a hostile environment for board members and intimidation through use of aggressive animals. I handed the letter to Rourke. "They're panicking," he said. "This is textbook deflection. They're trying to cast you as the threat." "Can we countersue?" he smiled. "Oh, we're way past that. We're building a case for civil damages and possibly an injunction to dissolve the current board entirely." I spent the next week quietly gathering statements from other neighbors, people who'd been fined improperly, denied appeals, or pressured into HOA-approved renovations. I compiled everything into a master timeline. Dates, documents, names. Then, 2 nights before our scheduled preliminary hearing, someone tried to break into my garage. The motion sensor lights snapped on, and the would-be intruder bolted before my driveway cameras got a clear shot. But they left behind a crowbar and a clipboard with the HOA's logo on it. I handed everything over to the sheriff's office. Deputy Raines came out personally. "They're desperate," he said, examining the clipboard. This was either an intimidation tactic or someone looking to destroy evidence. I filed an emergency protective order the next morning. The judge granted it within hours. Ellen and any member of the HOA board were now legally barred from coming within 200 feet of my home. That afternoon, I received an anonymous package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a USB drive labeled Board Minutes Private. I plugged it into a secure laptop and began listening. The recording was from a closed-door HOA meeting. Ellen's voice was unmistakable. "If we can't get Trevor to comply, then we'll have to make him regret being difficult. Think code violations, noise complaints. Let's make his life hell until he falls in line." Another voice chimed in. "Isn't that harassment?" her reply. "It's enforcement. If he wants to play hardball, we'll bury him in paperwork." I stared at the screen, stunned. That recording changed everything. With the drive in hand, I called Rourke. "This just became a whole different kind of case," he said. And Ellen just handed us her own noose. The courtroom was colder than I expected for a late spring morning, not in temperature, just in the way people looked at each other, like they were measuring outcomes before the first word was spoken. Colonel Rourke sat beside me in his pressed charcoal suit, flipping through the binder of exhibits. He didn't say much, just nodded occasionally, his eyes scanning like a radar locked onto a target. Ellen sat across the aisle, 2 rows ahead, flanked by a man in a tan blazer who didn't look old enough to rent a car, let alone represent a legal case involving fraud and trespassing. She kept her hair pulled tight and her jaw tighter. I noticed she didn't look back at me once. Probably didn't want to see someone she'd underestimated sitting calm and prepared. When Judge Mallory entered, nobody made a sound. Rourke leaned in just once. "She's been on the bench 22 years, he said. "Doesn't tolerate theatrics. Let the evidence speak," and speak it did. The recording from the closed meeting played first. The courtroom stayed silent, except for the occasional pen scratching from the clerk. When Ellen's voice suggested making my life hell, the judge raised her hand to pause the playback. "Where was this recording obtained?" she asked. Rourke answered without hesitation. "It was sent anonymously, Your Honor. We've submitted a forensic report confirming its authenticity and identifying the time and location. The HOA's own digital calendar confirms the meeting occurred and the participants match the voices." The judge looked over her glasses at Ellen. "Is that your voice, Miss Everhart?" Her lawyer stood. "We'd like to reserve judgment on the validity. That wasn't the question," the judge cut in. I asked if it's her voice. Ellen finally turned her head. She looked toward the judge, not at me, and said, "Yes." There went the first domino. Next came Karen Wu's sworn testimony. She entered the courtroom through the side door, clutching her notes but walking with purpose. When Rourke asked how HOA funds had been handled, she didn't blink. "There were payments made to 2 companies that don't exist in the state registry," she said. "One of them received over $15,000. The so-called security patrol invoices were fabricated. Ellen used those to hide movement of funds." The judge tilted her head. And you have documentation, Karen passed the binder to the clerk. Every check stub, bank transfer, and vendor record. I made copies before I resigned. Ellen's lawyer objected, citing privacy and internal policy, but Judge Mallory didn't even entertain it. This is a civil hearing regarding misuse of corporate funds and private property violations. Transparency is not optional. By the time Deputy Raines took the stand, Ellen's posture had collapsed into a defensive hunch. No more crossed arms, no more upward chin tilt. Just silence while Raines outlined the incident report from my property. He described the bolt cutters, the fence damage, and the itemized evidence I'd provided. Then he mentioned the break-in attempt. We recovered fingerprints from the crowbar, he said, holding up the lab report. They match a man named Desmond Hale. He's Ellen Everhart's nephew. Has a record in Nevada for petty theft and vehicle tampering. Ellen visibly flinched. Rourke stood slowly. And was Mr. Hale affiliated with the HOA in any capacity? Raines nodded. According to their internal roster, he was listed as a community liaison contractor, though no such position exists in the charter. The judge turned her attention to Ellen. Miss Everhart, did you authorize your nephew to enter Mr. Langston's property? Ellen's lawyer whispered something, but she waved him off. No, she said. He misunderstood a conversation we had. I never instructed him to go there. You expect this court to believe a man with a criminal record independently decided to break into a property central to an ongoing legal case involving his own aunt? Mallory asked. There was no answer. By the time the hearing ended, temporary protective orders were extended. Ellen was placed under formal investigation for misappropriation of HOA funds, and a preliminary recommendation was issued to initiate a full audit of Lakewood Pines HOA's financial records. Outside, the press had already started sniffing around. A local station's van was parked at the far end of the lot. I didn't stop for interviews. Neither did Rourke. But as we walked toward my truck, a familiar figure stepped out from a sedan near the curb. It was Harold Green, one of the longest-tenured residents in the neighborhood. He'd been quiet at meetings, always sitting in the back, never speaking unless called on. But now he walked up like a man with something to say. I've been on the HOA board for 16 years, he said, nodding to Rourke respectfully. Ellen took over 3 years ago. Ever since then, it's been meetings behind closed doors, unexplained expenses, and more fines than I've seen in the last decade combined. You knew something was off, I asked. I suspected, he replied. Couldn't prove it. She blocked access to the books. Said we were streamlining governance. I didn't know she'd gone this far. You willing to testify if this goes to court? He looked me dead in the eye. I'll bring every meeting minute and budget draft I've got. She's disgraced the neighborhood. That evening, I hosted a quiet gathering at my place. Not a party, just a chance for some of the neighbors to talk without the shadow of the HOA hanging overhead. People brought folding chairs, lemonade, and pie. It felt normal for the first time in a long while. Phil, the neighbor from across the street, showed up with a folder of his own. I found these, he said, laying down a stack of letters. Every one of these citations came with a threat of lien, but none of them are signed by more than one board member. Rourke glanced through them. That's illegal under your bylaws. Takes majority approval for enforcement. Murmurs spread through the group. By the end of the night, I had a list of residents ready to sign a petition demanding an emergency vote to dissolve the current board and appoint an interim committee until the investigation concluded. No one hesitated. 3 days later, the county prosecutor filed formal charges against Ellen Everhart for criminal mischief, conspiracy to commit trespass, and embezzlement. Her bail was posted by her attorney, but the damage to her influence was done. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen pending audit. County investigators seized records from the management company she'd used. Staff admitted under questioning that several invoices had been backdated at her request. The sheriff's department sent a cruiser to patrol the neighborhood every evening for the next week, not because of threats, but to prevent any cleanup activity by remaining loyalists. They never found anything suspicious. Most of Ellen's supporters had already vanished into the background. By the following Monday, the interim board was appointed. Harold Green was selected to chair it. One of their first acts was to nullify every citation issued in the past 12 months. Then they voted to rescind all bylaws Ellen had passed without quorum. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I walked along the lake that evening, the breeze cutting across the surface like it always had. Peaceful, still mine, Shadow trotted beside me, ears twitching at every rustle. Brutus stayed behind watching the porch. A good sentinel, always watching. When I reached the far edge of the yard, I noticed something half buried near the fence, an old sign Ellen had tried to install months ago. Community Access Trail under HOA development. I pulled it from the dirt, snapped the rotted wooden post in half, and tossed it in the bin on my way back. The lake was never for the HOA, it never would be, and now the whole neighborhood knew it. 2 months passed. The lake shimmered just the same, untouched and quiet, but the neighborhood had changed. There was a shift, subtle but unmistakable and unspoken, understanding that the era of Ellen's dominance was over. Mailboxes weren't filled with violation notices. No more strangers in reflective vests roamed the sidewalks with clipboards. People waved again, but things weren't settled. Not yet. The county audit had uncovered something uglier than anyone expected. What started as a financial review became a full-blown criminal investigation. Ellen hadn't just rerouted funds for landscaping and fake contracts, she'd orchestrated a shell company scam. The treasurer's copies had exposed a pattern: recurring payments to a company called Pine Horizon Services, listed as a maintenance vendor. Their listed address was a UPS drop box in a strip mall 2 towns over. When investigators traced the registered owner, they found the paperwork led to a closed LLC with Ellen's maiden name on the Articles of Incorporation. That was the final nail. The district attorney's office indicted her on multiple felony counts, including wire fraud, falsification of corporate records, and conspiracy to commit financial abuse of a nonprofit entity. When they raided her home, they found a burner laptop with spreadsheets tracking resident fines and projected revenue from targeted enforcement zones. The documents even included color-coded maps of the neighborhood, with certain properties marked in red, including mine. A county investigator later told Rourke that Ellen had planned to force buyout offers on homes near the lakefront. Hoping to consolidate control and resell them under a development deal she'd been negotiating with a private firm. She'd never gotten far enough to formalize it, but the communications were damning enough. The state attorney general's office took over the case once the scope became clear. Ellen's trial was fast-tracked due to the volume of evidence, and she was denied bail after surveillance footage showed her attempting to withdraw large amounts of cash from multiple accounts a day before her arrest. The trial drew attention. A local paper called it the most brazen abuse of HOA power in county history. Reporters packed into the gallery, but I didn't attend the hearings. Rourke represented me during my deposition, and I had no interest in watching her squirm. Instead, I focused on rebuilding. The interim board worked quickly. Harold Green, now acting president, implemented sweeping reforms. All enforcement actions were paused pending review. Financial authority was transferred to a third-party fiduciary. The old management company was dropped. Every resident received a mailed summary of the audit's findings, along with apologies signed by the new board. It wasn't just damage control, it was a reset. One morning, I was patching a section of the side yard when a woman I didn't recognize approached from the sidewalk. She looked mid-50s, carried a canvas tote, and wore a sun hat that shaded her face. "You're Trevor, right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, brushing sawdust from my gloves. "Can I help you?" "I'm Vanessa. I moved into the townhome section last year." I just wanted to say thank you. For what? For not backing down, she said. My mom lives with me. She got fined last winter for leaving a planter on the porch. It was a ceramic pot. Ellen said it violated conformity standards. We couldn't afford to pay it, so they started threatening a lien. I nodded once, already knowing where this was going. I never thought it would stop. Then you fought back and everything changed. People started talking to each other again. She lowered her voice. We weren't even sure we were allowed to. You always were, I said. They just made you think you weren't. She handed me a sealed envelope. The board's forming a permanent oversight committee. They want you to chair it. I'm not a politician, I said flatly. That's why they want you, she replied with a small grin. You're the only one who didn't want power even when you had it. I tucked the envelope into my back pocket. I didn't answer right away. That evening, I stood at the edge of the lake with Brutus and Shadow. The water was smooth as glass. Across the shoreline, where Ellen once tried to stake her imaginary trail, the grass had grown back thick and wild. A few ducks floated near the reeds, peaceful. From behind me, Harold's voice cut through the quiet. I figured I'd find you down here, he said. I turned. He was holding a clipboard and a bottle of cider. Thought you didn't drink, I said. I don't. This is for you. Figured you earned it. I took the bottle and set it on the railing. What brings you? We've finished reviewing the charter. Every amendment Ellen passed is being struck. We're setting term limits. No more closed meetings, and the treasurer position now requires an independent audit every fiscal year. Good, I said. It's overdue. Harold looked out at the lake. You know, she really thought she could take this from you. She didn't understand what it meant to people. It was never about the lake, it was about control, he nodded. There's talk of dissolving the HOA entirely. I raised an eyebrow. That possible? It's rare, but yeah. State law allows it if a supermajority votes to disband and transfer basic maintenance to a volunteer committee. No more dues, just neighbors. I leaned against the post. You think they'll go for it after this? They're ready to burn the whole thing down and start fresh. I didn't respond. The idea hung there, weighty and tempting. Harold handed me the clipboard. It's a petition, enough signatures, and we can call the vote. I glanced at the names, dozens already. People I barely knew but who had seen enough. I signed it. The vote happened 3 weeks later in the community center. Turnout was higher than it had ever been. People brought lawn chairs and coolers. Kids played tag in the grass. A neighborhood that had once whispered behind closed doors now laughed openly. When the results were announced, cheers erupted. The HOA was officially dissolved. The management company was terminated. Control over common areas reverted to a cooperative agreement between residents. The lake, protected under private deed, remained untouched. I didn't give a speech. I just stood near the back, arms folded, watching as people hugged, clapped, and passed around iced tea. Harold raised a toast. Vanessa played music from her phone. Someone grilled hot dogs. It felt like a block party, maybe the first real one in years. Later that night, I sat on the porch with Rourke. He'd driven in for the vote, though he mostly stayed quiet throughout. You know, he said, sipping from a glass, I've seen a lot of petty tyrants in my day. But Ellen might take the cake. She wanted to be a queen, I said. Forgot it wasn't her kingdom, he laughed once. You planning to stay? I looked out at the lake. Yeah, for a while, he stood. Well, if she tries to appeal, call me. Otherwise, I think this one's over. He left the glass on the railing and disappeared down the walkway. I stayed there long after the sun dipped below the trees. Brutus lay at my feet, head resting on his paws. Shadow paced the edge of the porch, scanning the dark like always. Loyal, watchful. The wind picked up, rustling the trees along the water. For the first time in a long time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like peace. And maybe that was the real win, not the lawsuits, not the charges, not even the vote. But the quiet. The kind you earn, not inherit. I stood stretched and went inside. The lake would be there in the morning. And this time it would still be mine.